Welcome to Music is Just a Word. I'm James Anderson. Hope you enjoy the podcast.
Music is just a word. Music is sick. No, music is dying. And I made a vow to save her.
That soundbite you just heard is from The Spirit of Music, which is a novel written by bass guitar superstar Victor L. Wooten. The prequel to this book is The Music Lesson. These are both great reads, but I recommend listening to them because Victor Wooten puts a lot of work into the music, and there's also a lot of voice acting and production value. The Spirit of Music begins with Victor Wooten asking the philosophical question of whether music as a whole could ever be threatened, get sick, die, or be killed, in a similar way to how we often ask whether Mother Nature as a whole could face these threats. Wooten goes on to illuminate music as a spirit or an entity that exists beyond the particular iterations we make with our instruments, our voices, and our notations on paper. Wooten presents this music with a capital M, much like a deity or an agency, and not an all-powerful one, of course, but one that can be vulnerable and threatened by various aspects of the modern world. Music as an entity unto herself is not just under threat, but also our experience of music as listeners and as players. One of Wooten's examples is the degradation in sound quality as we listen to music electronically, and he also gives examples of modern recording techniques that are pigeonholing the range of available music into something very constrained. Pitch correction is reducing the available range of frequencies. Auto-freaking-tune! Quantization is reducing the available range of rhythms and grooves, and tools like compressors are reducing the available range of dynamics. Wooten puts it very elegantly when he says, music is not reaching us in her entirety. Wooten also makes the point that the convenience in modern techniques of distributing music is actually isolating us from each other, and that listening to music is no longer the communal activity that it was at other times in history.
While music used to be experienced in groups, currently, listening is mostly a solo experience.
Nothing exemplifies this better than headphones, and as the plot unfolds, and we are made aware of a deliberate conspiracy to eradicate music, the conspirators' defining characteristic is their use of headphones. And if you've read or listened to this book already, you'll know that I'm talking about the characters he refers to as the phasers. Wooten's phasers and their operation to eradicate music was really a launching point for him to talk about the unique power of music among human endeavors.
We surmised that music was being targeted because of her power. Music brings people together. It does not have to be understood, studied, or agreed upon to be enjoyed. And because of that, it is a potentially powerful tool, one someone might be threatened by.
Much of the spirit of music involves the characters investigating a plot to destroy music, and the people carrying out this plot are the phasers, and they wear these blinking headphones, and Wooten vividly describes the uneasiness and the discomfort whenever the characters are in the presence of these phasers. So throughout this book, we see Victor Wooten dancing back and forth over the line that I would say divides the allegorical from the literal. And this is just like any other allegory. There will be parts that work better in the literal sense and other parts that work better in the allegorical sense. Take the Matrix, for example. The very first time Morpheus sits Neo down to tell him what the Matrix is,
the Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us.
We start with a more cinematic, more poetic introduction to the Matrix, something along the lines of Descartes' evil demon. But then Morpheus goes on to say, you can see it when you look out your window,
or when you turn on your television,
when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. And so as Morpheus goes on, it becomes increasingly clear this isn't some far-out sci-fi story about there being plugs in the back of our necks that are feeding us sensory information. No, we've just seen a glimpse of what the Wachowskis are proposing as the reality to which the allegory pertains.
You are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage. Born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
Now, where you draw the line between literal application and allegory depends on you, and perhaps no two people draw the line in the same place. Like any of the great allegories of history, from Wachowski's Matrix all the way back to Descartes' Evil Demon or Plato's Allegory of the Cave, there will be parts that do more to feed the allegory and other parts that do more to feed the literal interpretation or application. So getting back to Victor Wooten and the spirit of music, well, I'll put the question to the listeners. Is the sickness and endangerment of music because of some human purpose or some human intention? Is there a plot to eradicate music that we are aware of? The first thing that comes to my mind is the Taliban banning music in Afghanistan, and there might even be other examples around the world of groups that are intentionally trying to stop music from happening. But what I'm going to get into for the rest of the episode is something more subtle, more accidental, not always aligning with human intention and human purposes, but nevertheless posing every bit as much danger to music as an outright ban, such as that of the Taliban. Because, let's face it, I'm recording this from Canada, where we are apparently very music-friendly, and furthermore, much of Wooten's book plays out in Nashville, Tennessee, which some people refer to as Music City. And if music is in danger here in North America, we have to look beyond the jurisdiction of human purpose and human intention. And for this, I'm going to get into the principles pioneered by the famous Charles Darwin. So, what could evolutionary theory possibly contribute to our understanding of the sickness and endangerment of music? Well, let's start with what evolutionary theory accomplished for our understanding of the natural world, the world of plants, animals, and all organisms and life in general. Darwin's importance was to show us what elaborate and beautiful and complex things could arise in the complete absence of intelligent design and a humanoid creator. This beauty and complexity, of course, being primarily in the natural world, as far as we are aware when we think of Darwin. However, there have been very smart individuals who have shown that Darwinian principles can also apply to human culture. Individuals such as the philosopher Daniel Dennett, who we'll hear from later in the podcast. I learnt about Darwin in school like everybody else, but I first became really interested in Darwinian principles and really seeing everything these principles could apply to and everything they could explain when I discovered British author Susan Blackmore via a lecture of hers that I found on the internet. So here's a clip from this lecture.
What Darwin said was something like this. If you have creatures that vary, and that can't be doubted, I've been to the Galapagos and I've measured the size of the beaks and the size of the turtle shells and so on and so on, and 100 pages later. And if there is a struggle for life such that nearly all of these creatures die, and this can't be doubted, I've read Malthus and I've calculated how long it would take for elephants to cover the whole world if they bred unrestricted and so on and so on, and another 100 pages later. And if the very few that survive pass on to their offspring whatever it was that helped them survive, then those offspring must be better adapted to the circumstances in which all this happened than their parents were. You see the idea? If, then. The principle is you just need those three things: variation, selection, and heredity. If you have those, then you must get evolution, or design out of chaos without the aid of mind.
This last point is a reiteration of some of Daniel Dennett's work, and the point is crucial. Darwin's importance was breaking an ancient dogmatic tradition of understanding organisms as eternal and immutable creations of an intelligent, human-like deity, and replacing this with an explanation of organisms as the accidental results of the inert, unconscious, clueless process of natural selection. In the face of considerable opposition, Darwin demonstrated that organisms are not the result of an intelligent designer, but rather the result of an inanimate algorithm of cause and effect.
You don't need a designer or a plan or foresight or anything else. If there's something that is copied with variation and it's selected, then you must get design appearing out of nowhere. You can't stop it.
In Darwin's time, this was an upset for many people and their established ways of thinking. Natural selection is basically just an algorithm involving nothing other than the differential survival of organisms based on inheritance of characteristics not causing those organisms' parents and ancestors to perish. For many, it was difficult to accept that something so simple could have created modern life, such as we see around us in all its beauty and complexity. But it's not just the natural world that we have used Darwinian principles to explain. There have also been various attempts through history to apply Darwinian principles to explain the beauty and complexity of human culture. And for me, the most significant of these attempts is the field of memetics. What do you think of when I say the word meme? If you're like most people, you probably think of the funny pictures with the little caption that you see on the internet. But go ahead and take a moment and look up, where did the word meme come from? What is the origin or etymology of the word meme? You probably read something about evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, who coined the word meme in his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene. This book is mostly a discussion of biological evolution, centering around genes. Not the genes you wear on your legs, but the genes we inherit from our parents and pass on to our offspring in the form of sequences of nucleotides, in other words, DNA molecules, wrapped up in their little double helixes inside of the nucleuses of our cells. Dawkins shows how these genes are copying machines that are really at the heart of heredity and reproduction, and that in the course of evolutionary time, natural selection really operates at the level of these individual genes. Organisms like you and me are merely vehicles, survival machines, created by these replicating units of information, the genes, over the course of eons to facilitate DNA molecules' ability to create more DNA molecules. As I read The Selfish Gene, I was awestruck many times as Dawkins vividly describes the complex organic molecules constructing and comprising our bodies, and how incredible they are at creating exact copies of themselves, despite being so complex and so numerous. I mean, if the human body replaces about 300 billion cells each day, that's 300 billion new copies of a sequence of 3 billion pairs of DNA molecules. Here's where it gets interesting. What else do we know about in the universe that is complex and very good at getting itself copied?
Look around you. All around us, still clumsily drifting about in its primeval soup of culture, is another replicator. Information that we copy from person to person by imitation, by language, by talking, by telling stories, by wearing clothes, by doing things. This is information copied with variation selection.
In the last chapter of The Selfish Gene, Dawkins proposes the existence of a second kind of self-replicating entity of information undergoing Darwinian evolution by natural selection, analogous to the genes, but in the case of the memes, we have self-replicating units of cultural information, behavioral information, as opposed to genetic information. In the same way that self-replicating units of genetic information, genes, are responsible for the design of all the organisms we see around us, the units of cultural behavioral information, the memes, are responsible for the design of all the cultural things we see around us, from bridges and buildings to language, fashion, and music.
Memetics is founded on the principle of universal Darwinism. The principle here applies to anything that is copied with variation and selection. We're so used to thinking in terms of biology, we think about genes this way. And this is what Richard Dawkins was on about. And he wanted to get away from everybody thinking all the time about genes. And so he said, is there another replicator out there on the planet? Yes, there is.
So for all the people out there thinking that a meme is invariably a funny picture on the internet with a caption, of course I'm going to have to give some examples of memes in the original sense of the word as Dawkins coined it in 76.
Examples of memes are tunes, ideas, catchphrases, clothes fashions, ways of making pots or of building arches.
That was Lala Ward, one of the narrators of Dawkins' book. Meme is an abbreviation of the Greek word mime, which means that which is imitated. Certain ways of saying things can make very effective memes, referring to highway driving speeds in the buck so-and-so format. For example, nobody drives from Calgary to Edmonton any slower than a $1.30. Units of slang and fashion can replicate themselves from one person to the next, despite not providing any obvious advantages compared to their alternates. Meme success seems very arbitrary, especially when something that's a mistake or not true starts to take off and replicate successfully. I've been hearing a lot of people lately say voila instead of the correct French phrase voila, and this simple mistake is turning out to be a very effective meme.
It could never be that human beings could just copy the useful, beautiful, true things and not copy the other things. While their brains were having an advantage from being able to copy lighting fires, techniques of hunting, these kinds of things, inevitably they were also copying putting feathers in their hair or wearing strange clothes or painting their faces or whatever.
Dennett, in his book Darwin's Dangerous Idea, says that memes are roughly ideas. Not the simple ideas of Locke and Hume, the idea of red or the idea of round or hot or cold, but the sort of complex ideas that form themselves into distinct memorable units, such as the ideas of arch, wheel, wearing clothes, vendetta, right triangle, alphabet, calendar, the Odyssey. That's by Homer. Calculus, chess, perspective drawing, impressionism, green sleeves, deconstructionism. So you might be thinking, well, if these are all examples of memes, is there anything that's truly not a meme? Kind of reminds me of that old book explaining what is a noun. If a mink is a noun, and a fink is a noun, and even a skating rink is a noun, could all these things also be memes? It's difficult to point to something and say this is not a meme. And you can probably see by now that if something ever did really qualify as a non-meme and became well known as such, well, that would make it qualify all the more as what a meme is. We can try to derive limits on what counts as a meme from limits on what counts as a gene. A sequence of 3 nucleotides, C, G, and A, hardly counts as a gene, even though this small genetic sequence copies itself very effectively and is involved in the making of the amino acid arginine. It's not enough genetic material to have an appreciable effect on the building of its organism, such that we could definitely tell if this organism had the gene in question or one of its alternates in the gene pool, otherwise known as alleles. 2 genes competing for the same position on a chromosome of an organism are known as alleles. In practical terms, they are rivals. Back to the main point about what constitutes a meme and what, if anything, doesn't. To borrow Dawkins' words as he describes genes, this is not a rigid all-or-nothing definition, but a kind of fading out definition, like the definition of big or old. And so this is why, according to Dennett, you can have musical phrases that are simply too small to constitute a melody or to qualify for copyright protection, but then you also have examples like the first 4 notes of Beethoven's 5th Symphony, which are clearly a meme, replicating all by themselves, detached from the rest of the symphony, but keeping intact a certain identity or effect, and hence thriving in contexts in which Beethoven and his works are unknown. Darwin's Dangerous Idea, page 344. I remember I had a piano student who just kept wanting to play that one passage, da 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 da. I don't even recall if he ever got to the da 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 da. So I can't really think of a better example of a meme than that. And memes are everywhere in music. There are self-replicating patterns involved in the way people sing, and these evolve from one decade to the next. Certain patterns and quirks and performance techniques being invented by the hip individuals and then trickling out into the masses. Certain other techniques becoming dated, going out of style. Subtle things like rhythmic ways of speaking or singing things can replicate from one style of music to the next and to the next. Here's a short compilation that YouTuber Adam Neely put together to highlight a simple rhythmic pattern that is replicating prodigiously throughout today's pop music.
Party, thinking about it, baby. Camera situation, everybody looking at you, I can't.
Neely calls this rhythmic pattern the Scotch snaps. Certain production techniques come in and out of style, managing to replicate for a time. Seems like we're still in the era of listening to a lot of electronic hi-hat in a lot of our pop music. And of course, hi-hat patterns replicate among producers just as surely as rhythmic patterns like the Scotch snaps replicate among vocalists. And when the electronic hi-hat starts going as fast as we can even hear it, well, what is this if not a meme? So what makes something a meme and what makes something not a meme, and what makes a good meme or what makes a bad meme, is far from crystal clear. What makes a meme in principle and what makes a meme in practice aren't always the same thing. What makes a good meme as far as an effective replicator isn't always the same as what makes a good meme in the sense of a good demonstration of Darwinian dynamics in human culture. And this might be different still from a good meme in the sense of something that captures the legacy and the cultural following of the classic field of memetics. Although universal Darwinism and memetics really are theories of everything, fields and disciplines emerge in a very limited and very particular way. In other words, they have histories. And so memetics goes down in history being famous for what it's famous for, which I would say, other than a now convoluted concept of memes, would be the comparison between religions and viruses. We have to remember, every moment that we spend trying to define memes affects and is affected by any attempts we make to define genes. And I'd like to think that Dawkins' concepts of genes as replicators and organisms as vehicles for those replicators is still crystal clear in everybody's head today, almost 50 years later. But the fact of the matter is, the concept of memes has gotten pigeonholed into simply the funny internet picture with the caption. For a lot of people anyways, maybe not for everyone. To evaluate the concept of memes as a replicator in and of itself, we can say that this idea had great fecundity and was able to make many copies of itself around the world, but low fidelity in the fact that the idea has mutated and become obscure. There's a more technical discussion of what could have been different about memetics, but I'm going to have to save this for another episode. If you just can't wait for this upcoming episode, I suggest looking up Why Did Memetics Fail? A comparative case study by Radim Shivaja. For now, it's enough to say that memetics is kind of like the company BlackBerry. Memetics has had its rise, and memetics has somewhat had its fall. Now, I certainly consider myself a memeticist. I wouldn't be making this podcast if that weren't the case. But I'm going to be advocating a very different approach to memetics. For one thing, I'm going to be arguing that memetics is ultimately not a science, and I'm also going to be pointing out some deep, many-layered ironies with memetics. But all in all, this podcast is me making the case that memetics is exactly what this world needs, and exactly what music needs. On a more general level, I really can't think of a more pressing issue than the evolution of human culture and civilization. What is civilization? What is culture? Where did they come from? Where are they going? Memetics and universal Darwinism can help us approach these questions by offering comparisons between the emergence of human culture here on Earth in the relatively recent past, and possibly the emergence of civilization in the very recent past, with the only other real emergence that offers any suitable comparison, namely the original emergence of life. It's a very strange time to be alive. Every era that goes by, every decade that goes by in our human history seems to be completely alien from the last. We can often say the same thing about generations of people. We know on a visceral level, an instinctive level, that we are not the same people as we were, and that the people that are coming in the future are not going to be the same as us, and that we're not the same as the other creatures that we share this planet with. And it's hard to see any of these differences and disparities doing anything other than increasing. And all of this is because we have this thing called civilization. And civilization just keeps transforming and it just keeps growing. And I think we realize deep down that this simply isn't something that can continue forever. And so whether it's good old-fashioned pollution or overpopulation or some other extended consequence of industrialization and agriculture, or perhaps some specific cultural element like nukes or some AI project gone bad or any kind of bad actor, really take your pick. I think a lot of us are afraid that some piece of culture is going to bring the whole experiment of culture to a halt. And we may not live to tell the tale. And of course, for many creatures, this point has already come and gone. In the past, there have been 5 major extinction events on Earth, each of them wiping out somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% to 95% of the species existing at the time. And it's pretty well established that we are in the midst of a 6th major extinction event here on Earth. But where the previous extinction events were all caused by things like volcanic activity and asteroids, for example, the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, and all manner of accidental things that come from the sky, things that come from underground, things outside of anybody's control, this particular extinction event is unprecedented in every way, because for once in history, an extinction event on the planet Earth is being caused by an intelligent species. And again, this is because we have this thing called civilization. The reason for bringing memetics and Darwinism into this is to bring home the point that, for better or for worse, the terrible and the beautiful alike, there is a portion of culture that lies beyond the jurisdiction of our intention, our purpose, and our control. And I think we know this on a deep down level. We know that we're not completely in control. We can feel instinctively that there is some degree of autonomy with cultural evolution. And whether or not you choose to impart some personality or agency on this sense of autonomy is up to you. I, for one, don't see a being or a consciousness in the internet, for example, and that's just me. But the thing is, we, the conscious beings, had to come from somewhere if you go far back enough. And that somewhere, that primordial soup of design and complexity without the aid of mind, is still spitting things out. As Dawkins mentions, the rate of cultural evolution is orders of magnitude faster than the rate of biological evolution. Not only are the new replicators leaving the old gene panting far behind, they are actually leaving the whole biological community in complete shambles. And when we drive species to extinction, this often entails a whole piece of the soundscape that has disappeared forever. If we can regard the various noises that animals make as music in some way or another, the music is going extinct just like the creatures that make it. Civilization is also driving many human cultures to extinction, and many of these peoples definitely had music that is now lost along with the cultures that made it. For all that I can talk about music as a specific human endeavor, there is a sense in which music is bigger than this, bigger and more pervasive. Music is more than just concerts, instruments, performances, notations, recordings. There's a sense in which music characterizes every person, even the ones that don't think they're musical, and every interaction, even the ones we wouldn't explicitly name as music. The same can be said about many things, but music in particular reaches far and wide and could, in an extended sense, apply to everything we do and everything we are. At the end of the day, there isn't really a difference between our music being in existential danger and we ourselves being in existential danger. Because, at the end of the day, music is just a word! This is James Anderson, signing off of the first episode of Music is Just a Word. Music by me, damn it, and thanks to Q Mike McGee for screaming the title. I hope you tune in to the next episode, which is going to be part 2 of Memetics, Music, and the Self-Replicating Human Behavior.